I would recommend that we approve the minutes for the operations work group dated April 16th, 2018.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Okay, well, then we are on to sort of almost the meat of our agenda here, which is the long-range facilities plan update. And so we have, yes, okay, what do we call that?
Guys with ties.
Guys with the ties, but they're taking a summer
Yeah,
off. Well, the bookend Matt and yeah.
Guys in plaid, I think, is
Yeah.
the closest we can get to tonight.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then, Jen, should I turn it over to you, or Mike, are you kicking it off
Yeah,
here?
let's turn it right over to Mike.
Okay.
Thanks, Mary, I appreciate it. The brief outline for this evening's presentation is here. Chad's going to present a review of the April 15 facility improvement plan. Andrew's going to do a little work on vision and the guidelines for our long-range facility planning going forward. I'll do a little update on our current direction, early emerging direction on facility work. And then Matt will be following with a discussion on policy 1535. And we understand you've got multiple items on tonight's agenda, so we'll try to move this along as quickly as possible.
So as Mike said, we are finally closing down the spring of 2015 referendum projects, and we feel really good about how they all ended up at 16 total sites. Mike was just doing the math, reviewing our PowerPoint. We added 26 total classrooms,
28.
A bunch of elevators, basically redid all of Jefferson, put a new theater at East High School. So it's some pretty complicated work, and we're proud of how they all wrapped up. So as a reminder, the goal of these projects was to take care of some overcrowding issues, and that's where those 26 classrooms came in. Some accessibility issues, and we really feel like we accomplished that, and take care of some long, outdated instructional spaces. At all of these sites, we touched many of these spaces. Jefferson in particular got a complete rehab. We also created the time and conditions to do what we're going to do tonight, to actually take a long-range look at some of the facility planning. So this was just kind of a stopgap to get us through on some immediate needs. And we're proud of the product that we feel like we delivered these projects as promised to our taxpayers. All these projects had vastly improved accessibility issues taken care of. Jefferson in particular, we changed a D- into one of our best buildings in the district, and did so over a couple of summers. We wanted to do a quick rundown, just a reminder of some of the things we accomplished. I'm not going to read all these slides because I know we're tight on time. The elevator over there on the right, Mike's like, is that even our elevator?
Yes,
this is actually an elevator from Lowell, where they did a little bit of a retrofit to make it kind of fit the decor of the building. John Burmaster was huge in that project and provided a lot of input. Certainly a highlight on this slide is the fact that we added 8 whole classrooms to Sandburg. The next slide, we had, I guess the picture here, you certainly look at the brand new East High School Theater. I also wanted to just call out the fact that we drove elevators through the middle of some pretty complex buildings. Lowell and Alice in particular were really complicated sites. To go through 100-year-old buildings and put in elevators where they were not meant to be was pretty impressive work, and to have those done, many times done while school was in session. Last slide here, this is actually a picture of the Hegel Library. Our own in-house trade staff did the entire Hegel project. They remodeled every instructional space, upgraded the entire library, and put new mechanicals there. And certainly wanted to call out Jefferson. We asked them, because of the bidding process and the way we had to design these projects, we asked Jefferson to go through a complete remodel 2 summers in a row, where they had to empty all of their instructional materials, all their personal items, wrap up the building at the end of the school year, and then start fresh again in the fall. So the Jefferson staff in particular bent over backwards. The product's great, but it sure is a pain while you're going through it. So there's a quick reminder of all the projects we took care of. we actually see we've got Evan with us. So Evan Halepop. Evan is Halepop. Evan is a West alum, current UW Whitewater student, and is a student intern in our communications department. Put together a very short video montage of these little referendum projects. So we're going to play that now.
The new entryway at our school has given us a facelift, demonstrating how we are moving into the 21st century in a historical building. Our Welcome Center welcomes families in while still keeping the security and safety of our children in mind. We have new ramps, a new elevator, a lift, and a lula.
Spring Harbor is grateful for its office addition and elevator. Moving the office to the first floor has increased security for our building. The elevator is providing increased access to our building for people with mobility impairments.
This is pictures of Franklin Elementary where we added an elevator and a new secure entrance, redid a maker space inside the school, and actually put in another smaller elevator called the Blue.
The results of the referendum project were particularly admired as part of our school's 50th celebration, with comments that included the school looks fantastic from both the street and inside. For the first time, I can get to my child's classroom on the second floor. One other comment was, I love the new main office and entrance setup. It's both secure and welcoming at the same time.
Shore Road was there's a kindergarten classroom where we put a ramp in, Midvale, new cafeteria, redone classrooms, several lifts.
The Lowell community is grateful for the referendum work completed at Lowell in 2017. Prior to the work, a student, staff member, or visitor would encounter steps in 8 different locations across a typical day. Happily, this past fall, a Lowell parent confined to a wheelchair attended parent-teacher conferences for the first time, thrilled that she could enter through our front doors and take the elevator to her daughter's second-floor classroom.
And as I mentioned, we did Eagle all in-house. Really nice to do. Credit to our skilled trades group.
East High School is fortunate enough to be included in the last referendum. This was approximately a $4 million project that benefited the school but also benefited the community. Well, it impacts the community because it highlights our fine arts department, but it also highlights just all the talent on the east side. Our music department puts on multiple concerts. We had our first musical in the past 20 years, in which we had packed houses all 3 nights. We've invited our Hmong community to celebrate the Hmong New Year. I don't think it's just my favorite feature, the chairs. Several years ago, we had the old bowling alley style chairs in here, and it was pretty brutal to sit. You sit in comfort. When you're in here, you just feel like you're in a place that is just amazing. But it'll be something that will be really nice to be able to give back to our taxpayers to be able to utilize the Margaret Williams Theater.
All right.
So Evan, nice job.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you. The orange chairs are gone, but apparently not forgotten.
No, they never will be. Yeah, so just to wrap up, certainly wanted to thank our construction planning team. A ton goes into taking input from both the school-based staff and the team of architects to pull these projects off. Mike Herding was around to get all this off the ground. He certainly deserves a shout out, and Mike Berry as well. I can't say enough about the work that our building services team did. We bid into an incredibly difficult construction environment where these projects could have been 15–20% over each of them. And Rick Hopke in particular is just a lifelong architect for the district. I worked with those teams to design and redesign, in some cases rebid those projects. Certainly thank the school-based staff for putting up with the dust and the noise and everything that goes along with school construction. And as I said, the building services team. And lastly, our community for helping fund these projects. They made a big impact at the school, and we were happy to be able to deliver on them.
Mm-hmm. I want to echo my thanks to everyone on Chad's list as well. Evan, Evan, thank you for capturing it so nicely in that video. And just as a reminder, we decided, well, when we did that referendum several years ago, we wanted to use it in part as a confidence building mechanism to show that we could not only scope the projects, but actually get them done and pretty much on time, which we were able to do, which is really exciting. So good job. Good job, team.
Yeah, thanks to all the team, and I think that it was a good referendum and that good things came of it. Looking forward to the Building Excellence Plan and future referendums. Will there be a more detailed report to the board and the community about what the project designs began as, how they evolved over time, what the financials looked like, and all those pieces? I mean, I think that that's the kind of thing where when you start asking for a new referendum, people say, well, what happened to the old one? And
That's a good question.
that kind of report would be very helpful to say that, you know, these were the original, this is what we went to the voters with. For these reasons, this project changed A, B, and C. This one was under, this one was over, this one we transferred money from Fund 41, we reclassified, that kind of stuff. Then, you know, most people won't read it, but you can say, yeah, it's all right here if you want it.
Right.
So I think that would be appreciated.
I think it's a great idea. We can put it on our website and make it available to anyone who wants it. Yeah?
It's doable.
That sounds great.
Doable?
Sounds
Doable?
Totally.
Awesome. All right, speaking
Yeah.
of building excellence in the future.
Great, thank you. This group has seen this before. I kind of refer to it as our, I suppose our purpose statement. It links together two really key concepts. First of all, aligning our facilities to our vision, aligning our facilities to our values. The second concept is changing needs. So the work has been ongoing for some time. There's been a lot of effort and a lot that's been produced to help us best understand current facility needs, changing facility needs in the future, as well as our community's values. So you've seen community input summaries, values, and key concepts coming out of those input sessions, along with things like the periodic table of facilities, so you know what they're rated, what their outstanding repair bill might look like. Gives you a good idea of the full picture of the district, but then also individual schools. Our 5-year projections continue to be published, but then we also now have 20-year projections. So we've got a strong understanding of how all of this is emerging and how our needs have changed over time. But the guiding principles that we have to help us decide which projects are undertaken, both large and small, are guided by a few different sources. So each of these come at a different time in history. They offer different perspectives. Our perspectives may have changed. There may be inconsistencies internally among them. So we do want to bring this to you. So if we are on the same page where we're trying to align our facilities to our values, it's also important that we align our guidelines to help inform those decisions. So looking at how to tie these things together is actually a conversation we have at the end of this presentation. That's why we have Matt up here to talk about a particular policy and what that might look like. But knowing what we know today from these 4 sources, we've made some assumptions, and that has helped inform then a series of key next steps and new directions we'd like to go over next.
All right, so here we go. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it. So before we dive in and talk specifically about the high schools, first just a couple of sort of we believe statements. We believe there's a connection between learning and the learning environment. We believe there's a connection between behavior and the learning environment. We believe there's a connection between parent enrollment choices for their children and the learning environment. I could go on. Thus, the deep importance of this work. The project started about 1.5 years, almost 2 years ago now, and really started from scratch, trying to build what we called a web-based resource for long-range facility planning. We had not done a community growth study in at least a decade, maybe longer. We did that with Vanderwall. We're going to update that in the summer of 19. We created the Facility Condition Index that rates each of the schools. Chad's team's done that. We've revisited and revisited school capacities and how we calculate them. Still have some work to do on that. We've mapped out our attendance boundaries. So all this foundational work, and it's supposed to be out there living live on the web. What we're trying to do now is make sense of all of those resources and begin to form action plans that will come in 4-year increments. 4-year increments because long-range facility planning and facility improvements cost a lot of money. Typically require voter-approved school bond referendum debt, and usually the most fair thing to do is put those bond referendums on the election where the most people vote, which tends to be the presidential cycle. Next one is 2020. What you're going to see tonight, it really reflects the current state of our thinking. The items on here really go beyond any one particular school bond referendum. There's more here than you could ever do in one school bond referendum. So this is really a 2020 plan, it's a 2024 plan, and maybe beyond that. And we'll have to sort all that out as we go through this over the next year, I would think. So what you're going to hear from us tonight that you may not have heard in the past is a little more focus on the alternatives piece of this work, a little sharper focus on the elementaries as well, and a little bit new on the middle school element. So let me dive in and talk about the high schools first, and it's kind of a sweeping overview of the 4 major areas. The high schools. So we usually say this about the high schools. 2 of them are almost 100 years old. The other 2 are almost 60 years old. They haven't really been invested in. So we should all know what to do. We should all decide to know that that means it's time to reinvest. Okay. They are that old. They have not had substantial reinvestment. It's been per issue. We've met with the folks who did it. We went way back. We talked to Art. We talked to Mary. We talked to the whole gang that used to be here. They did asbestos when that was the issue. They did accessibility when that was the issue. They did electrical components when they were trying to wire for technology. But none of the high schools have had a really comprehensive refresh on the facility itself. And we think that is long overdue. How exciting would it be to bring these 4 high schools where we have 7,500 students, 2.5% of the students in the state attend one of our 4 high schools, to put those high schools in a place where for the next 25 years they are really viable and vibrant learning communities. That's our goal. This has been the centerpiece of our thinking, the high schools. It remains a priority, maybe the priority when we talk long-range facility planning. It seems almost the most obvious. But there's work to do. The needs in the different schools vary. So we're thinking that we need to get in front of each of these individual school communities, talk about their priorities, what's needed, what the instructional program input will tell us, and then balance that with the sort of outside review by architects, engineers, financial people, etc. Ultimately develop a plan for each of the 4 schools and then start bringing that forward to the board and for public scrutiny at the same time. I can pause here. It looks like we've got a couple of folks leaning into their microphones, so happy to pause.
Would that also include looking at if air conditioning is a possibility,
Yes,
not
absolutely.
a possibility?
Okay.
Okay. So high schools are a huge piece of the work. Alternatives. So we've presented now a couple of times in front of the board on specific long-range facility aspects, and this has come up every time. And it's also come up in forums other than long-range facility planning. What are we doing on these alternative program sites? We know that we have been reactive at best in creating sites for to house alternative programs. As you know, we have a rented space, which is essentially a kind of a strip mall type building on Gammon Road across the street from Memorial. We have a parallel situation, an office building on Olin across from the Coliseum, where we actually have 3 different segments of the same building rented. And then we have the 3rd floor at Lapham, which has been an issue for on and off for years. And you can see that we're paying a lot of money in lease costs just for Olin and Gammon. We think that this is one aspect of long-range facility planning that doesn't have to be that long range because it's not that expensive relative to the other work. We want to accelerate this. We're looking for a demonstration project to show what can and should be done around facilities. We think this might be it. And obviously we've got a lot of ideas coming from Capitol High folks and student services team, but we'd like to get after this. I think an east-west hub. Ultimately, we want high-quality building assets that we can control and that we can invest in. One of the problems with renting is you can't invest in it. Why remodel something you're renting? Anybody ever remodel an apartment you were renting? Of course not, right? So that we can control and we can develop and we can build equity in. That's what we're looking for on the alternatives. Comments? Questions?
I'll just add that just to reinforce that, we did actually invest in remodeling the Olin Avenue this year.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was, but it was a nice dollar figure, and it was just very uncomfortable.
Yeah, minimum necessary, of course, but yeah.
And kind of two other pieces to this is that if we're looking for spaces where alternative programs are being housed, and there are good reasons to often to have a space away from our traditional schools. I mean, I think some of them can be in our house in our traditional schools. I also, as we look at these spaces, either within our traditional schools or for an alternative space, creating meeting spaces and professional development spaces for our staff additionally, as another place where we're doing a lot of short-term rental, and each individual short-term rental isn't that much, but over the course of 3 years, 5 years, it adds up. And I think we should have available those kind of professional spaces to, some things we're going to have to, we're not going to have a ballroom that fits 500 people, but we can have a series of rooms that do fit 20 to 40 people and use those. And I think that those could be also instructional spaces as well as professional development spaces. And the last thing is that, especially on that last piece, we do have schools that are under capacity. And utilizing and remodeling space within undercapacity schools for either alternative programs or for professional development and meeting spaces, to me, makes a lot of sense. We don't want to be in a position where we have underutilized buildings where we're looking at closing them. And this is a way to augment the use value of the schools and keep them viable as both neighborhood schools and as something plus. And we've got, if you look at the 20-year projections, there's 2 schools that the viability is long-term questionable based on projections. So I really would encourage that. And there's even schools, a school like East High School, which is certainly viable as a school, is very underutilized in terms of its capacity calculations. So there's potential there, and I really want to make sure we explore it.
Very good. And thank you for the intro. To that point, we take a look at the elementary level. We have projected growth in some areas of the school district, but not in others. We covered that with the board in the past. We have excess capacity in some areas, especially the Northeast, but we are short of capacity in other areas of the district where we do need to address. We have concerns about the sort of equitable distribution of the elementary school locations. We would point to the south side, or south of the Beltline certainly, as an example of where we think schools ought to be, but are not. How we balance that with existing capacity, overcapacity, and so on is to be determined. But we presented to the board some of our thoughts around elementary. It was actually kind of a sweeping proposal back in December of 17. We really want to narrow that a little bit and talk about the 2 strands of elementary work we think are most important. And I think Andrew's going to walk you through that.
Yeah, so the As Mike said, there are a lot of moving parts for elementary, but we'll focus on a couple of strands or sequences. So this is a variation on what you'd seen last time. So when we have Sprecher, Nuestro Mundo, and Alice on this list, it's 3 schools with 3 needs, 1 each. So Sprecher is driven by population growth. It is residential growth that could impact, it will impact at some point, Kennedy and Elphium schools. Nuestro Mundo is in a leased space currently, and then when we look at the attendance areas of Alice, better than 2/3 of the students are bused from what we often refer to as South Alice. So these 3 hang together as a solution. So if we build on Sprecher and build in southern South Alice, that does open up space for Nuestro Mundo to move into owned space out of the Maywood building, at least from another district, as well as ensure Kennedy and Elphium are not then overcrowded because of development that can occur in the north area in particular of those attendance areas. So those 3 kind of hang together. So it's not that one is more valuable than another, but some will have to happen before others to allow these pieces to move. So for example, we would build Sprecher and Alice South on roughly the same timeline. That would allow us to address the residents around the immediate Alice area, as well as then give the students in South Alice a neighborhood school. So they have then the proximity and access to that school. That allows you to buy some time to rehab Alice then and move Nuestro Mundo into it. So these kind of stage out. Another strand that kind of hangs together because they're both south of the belt line, Leopold and Allied. So those 2 would hang together as a potential common solution. All of this, of course, gets into land availability, boundary changes, and all kinds of good things. But those are the 2 big strands that we have. So just to refresh memories a little bit and focus in on those 2.
Just remind us, what's the size of those? What would be the size of those kind of schools?
I can look it up and get back to you. I'll do that as I turn this back over to Mike. Yeah.
I mean, the question is just to try to have some perspective on how small is too small for a school, or future kind of operating.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think I will do the math on it. But to suffice to say that there are enough students in the South Alice area to warrant a school of its own. So that's one. And then Sprecher, it's a matter of time and phasing for those developments. But let me see what kind of numbers I can pull up here offline.
So kind of quickly on the Allied, would we create a new school at Allied, or would we combine it with Leopold? How would we?
We would have to explore options for building in the Allied neighborhood. Excuse me. When I say boundary changes, there are possibilities of rearranging existing attendance areas to create Allied as a larger school. But we also know that there's a large number of students in the Allied area that would support a school. But that's why I pieced those 2 together. Yeah, it's in the elementary. Yeah. 200 elementary, 400 total. Yeah, so that's part of it. Yeah, and that's part of that then is what do you do with boundaries to get the right size, as well as other attractants. So is there something special about an Allied school or any school that you could use to create super attendance areas or something akin to DLI or magnet charter status? Those kinds of things could then get students coming from a larger area. So when we say boundaries, we talk about it in a very general sense, not just moving a line on a map, but then how do you get a critical mass of students?
That could involve external boundaries as well. Verona School District boundary comes all the way up to Allied Drive, and it seems a much more natural, organic, better fit for that to be Madison. So there might be some possibility of talking with Verona about the future of that boundary.
Teacher.
I'm glad Mike brought up the Verona boundary. I think that neighborhood integrity is, in terms of neighborhood schools, is important, and I would encourage participating. I mean, would encourage exploring that and contacting and see, and if we have to do a swap or something, I think that would be very beneficial for us and for the students in the Allied area, regardless of whether we end up building an Allied school. I just think that the way that neighborhood is divided is just really, and I believe there's actually, isn't there a small corner that's also Oregon schools? There's which is, you know, I mean, 3 school districts in a small neighborhood with about 200 students is crazy. Additionally, I think that the issues that Nikki and Kate brought up point to some of the, I guess it's the word of the month, complexity involved, and that we have a lot of moving pieces here, and that school attendance areas, taxation, building, all these are things that people care deeply about. So I think that we have to be very inclusive and open and thorough as with each step we take forward, that, and very conscious about this is this step and this is the next step in decision making, and what kind of information does the community need, what kind of information does the board need, things along those lines, because these are very, these are things that hit close to home, literally close to home. People buy their homes based on on their school attendance. And the final piece is that when we talk about the Beltline area, Glendale has a huge transportation south of the Beltline impact, and I think that to look at Alice and not look at Glendale would be a violation, if not our equity policy, certainly our equity principles. And you know, there's some real good things going on in Glendale and the Glendale school community these days, and you don't want to mess with that. But I also think that it has to be on the table if we're going to be addressing that kind of, you know, isolation of a neighborhood from its school, from its attendance area, which is part of what we're looking at with Alice. We have to include Glendale in that conversation. I just can't see how we can't do it. So that's the last piece.
And when we talk about south of the Beltline, I'd like to actually look at it in a much broader sense than that. I think we're losing a lot of students south of the Beltline, and I think that we should look at it in a way that says, how do we, particularly within our district boundaries, become the schools we want to attract our students to. Just recently we saw that the data on the Swan Creek, the percentage of students there that we're losing through open enrollment. We know in Fitchburg and other areas we're losing enrollment. I think that it's really important that that actually be a very, very high priority in terms of how we, not only where we place schools, but what are we doing to make sure that our schools are thriving and that we're attracting students and we are the school of choice in the areas that we're serving. So I believe it needs to be much bigger with regards to south of the Beltline. Okay.
So this elementary piece is hard for me. And don't get me wrong, like I'm so excited about doing an investment in our facilities, right? Our community is a leader in the state in education, and our kids deserve leading facilities. And we have the fuel to do it with our tax-based growth. So I'm 100% behind doing something. I struggle with the elementary piece because some of our challenges around resourcing schools is because we've got a lot of small elementary schools. And at least based on the projections we've seen in the near future, we're not going to be over capacity for our elementary schools. We're going to be at 85%, 88%, something like that, with some that are significantly under. And so this conversation feels a little open-ended, which is fine given the stage we're at, but in order to go to the taxpayers and ask for a referendum to fund 2 brand new buildings, I think we need to be a little bit more clear on why we need 2 more buildings. Our existing buildings need a lot, and we've got 12,000-ish elementary school kids in those existing buildings that could support 100% of our students and then some. So I know it, and so please don't get me wrong, I would love nothing more than a brand like a brand new shiny elementary school that has state-of-the-art everything. I'm just not convinced that we need it. And so I think that maybe just a challenge back to you guys for the next time we have this conversation, convince us. So yeah.
Very good. Well, I'll take on half that argument now.
Okay, great.
One of the schools we rely upon is rented from Monona Grove, and is so that was not meant to be a permanent solution, and so that's really that whole Sprecher and the Wastrel piece. So, but I agree that these are important, expensive, long-term decisions you got to get right.
Yeah.
And we fully expect the board and the public input to test the heck out of these hypotheses with us, and hopefully it's in a constructive way. We're not here to sell anything. We're just trying to get the right answers, and hopefully everyone will help us with that, and we'll try to help you. So yeah.
And I would just add that you may remember this from the last presentation, Kate. We had a lot more possible projects on this list. So we're trying at the elementary level to get at the most acute issues. And I agree. We're not selling it. But it's just best thinking at this point. And your point is really well taken.
And in general, I mean, I think these are good ideas to play out. I want to bring in our operating budget as a piece of this puzzle, because we can set ourselves up for a much better annual kind of decision-making process around staffing and compensation if we have buildings that can be fundamentally a little bit more efficient. So it just
very good.
That makes sense.
I want to. I'm sorry, Gloria. Did you jump in?
And then also just want to offer and recommend doing a equity analysis as you're moving through this process continually. So you're capturing, that's going to come up, right? It is sort of, and I think that helps us identify sort of where the missing gaps are in our city and where we need to invest. So maybe putting it through a equity analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. Okay. The last piece is the middle school piece, and we didn't call this out really prominently in the December original 2017 presentation, mostly just because the presentation was dying of its own weight. But the middle school is, I think, an important bucket of issues. Our impression as a team is that the schools are time-worn and care-worn, and they look tired. They look outdated. There's an emerging instructional lead that we are trying to follow on middle schools. The terminology, I'm borrowing from a little bit from the instructional folks, but smaller learning communities, depending on how you define that, within the middle school, certainly more flexible spaces, common spaces, certainly updating what you can do in the exploratory elective wheel. Those all have implications for facilities, and a lot of input needed, mostly from those middle school communities and from the instructional design folks. We're trying to follow them in developing the middle school strand. So that is a kind of a broad sweep, right? High schools, alternatives, elementaries and middles, and really what we're seeking here tonight is first your sort of acknowledgement that this is the right work, a heads up that if we continue in this direction, you're going to see items appearing on the consent agenda, either for an architect, an engineer, maybe a realtor for site scouting, items like that. You also might hear that we're creating a study group at a school, or others, and we want to make sure that we don't get too far out ahead of our board. But we can't develop the ideas unless we do these things. So it's kind of the right time to check in and let you know that this is the work we would like to do, but we want to be sensitive to the right pacing, and so we're here for this check-in.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. What scale of investment do you think this is going to round to? Just if we lay all this out.
If I were to, Andrew, help me if you think I'm off base here. Over the course of the next 12 to 16 months, probably on the low end, maybe 80,000, maybe.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about 2 new elementary schools.
Oh,
and
good Lord.
updating our
Yeah.
high schools.
Well,
go hire
yeah,
the architect, Mike.
probably
Like, you're
more.
good. just
Yeah. Okay, so let me take the $80,000 number back off the table. Yeah. Okay, well, let's, just allow me all of the usual disclaimers that it's
Understood.
early. These high schools could each need 10 to 40 million, depending on how far you want to go with it. And that has to be determined, right? But you should not be surprised by that number. Elementary schools are now typically, what, $20 to $25 million per new elementary school. Figure that in. Middle school, those are mostly remodeling concepts, but even remodeling's running $150 a square foot. Middle school could be another substantial investment. The one that's easiest to get at is the alternatives, where I think, because they don't need a ton of space, we can get at that without even having a referendum. I think we could do a state trust fund loan and be able to find sites and make that work. Heck, we're already spending $300,000 a year just for lease costs.
Yeah.
So add all that up, and I believe it is beyond the scope, my own personal opinion, of any one referendum. I think that you might be looking at a 2020 and 2024 type of strategy.
Okay. Next year, just to make sure I'm clear with you, Mike,
Yeah.
is to figure out what the scope is for the upcoming 2020.
Yeah, it's kind of a narrowing
we
and
might have,
chunking
we
out.
might have a good feel for what might come after that.
Right.
Really specific on that first package.
Yeah, does that help?
It does. I guess maybe back to the elementary school kind of, I'd love to see some thinking around remodeling versus new schools, both in terms of cost, but also in terms of what could we do. We know that there are certain neighborhoods that are growing that are in the densest parts of our city. How do we want to think about that, right? Air conditioning in all of our elementary schools, stuff like that, just to play out what does, same thing as this page says, all the flexible space, kind of state of the art, right? What would that look like to remodel versus build a brand new school? So before we go and hire an architect to show us, here's what it is if you get a brand new school, I'd love to see just some options. So that was one question. I mean, maybe the same around the high schools. I mean, I would love to see some options around either alternatives or high schools for arts and music, just to understand. So I don't know if that's a part of the work that an architect would do, or if you need input on that, but.
Can you say more?
That's your high school
Yeah.
pie chart, and I think we broke out arts from academics. It was originally housed within academics, but you can see down there that we know that the performance spaces, the auditorium spaces in the high schools are pretty substandard.
Yeah.
Not to mention the music rooms, the choir rooms, the individual practice rooms are all quite dated.
How are you thinking about prioritizing these projects?
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, West is over capacity, La Follette is under capacity.
We are thinking about prioritizing these projects, yes. So I don't know that I'm ready to really articulate a standard on high schools relative to middle, relative to elementary. We know, like, for example, within each level, within the high schools, there are categories of work. So, of course, life safety comes first.
Yep.
That would be, asbestos, lead, mold, of whatever, et
I'm gonna hope we've
cetera,
already dealt
right?
with those, but
So we all know those. Life safety comes first. Code compliance, even if we were grandfathered, code compliance comes next. And then you start getting into the instructional priorities in the building, and then the operational efficiency priorities within the building. And that's where it gets a little tough. How do you prioritize? I'll use an example. The remodeling of a library to create a learning space versus replacing a functional but not efficient heating system. How do you, and that's why I think that each one of these schools is going to have its own story. And obviously we're going to have standards that we adhere to, but I think you're going to see some variation on the priorities. And then, you know, also you've got just pure old aesthetics beyond, you know, beyond the categories I've already mentioned. So we see doing that in the different levels. I think that's our next work this fall.
Last question.
Okay, we do have other people.
Yeah, no, just so last question is, have we thought about private fundraising as a part of this puzzle, and how would we need to stage that? Can we do that with a referendum? Can we not? What's the?
Yes, I think it certainly, and it will play a role. If I may, I'm just going to say this. I think that it is a complementary role. Yeah. I don't think that fundraising will do the heavy lifting on hundreds of millions of dollars of work over, you know, the next 8 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. But it is a complementary and often difference-making enhancement to what the school district is doing. I would love to see it turn out that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, Nikki.
I don't want to sound like a broken record, but can we look at the cost of window units, at least on the air conditioning and some of our sites? I do worry, especially on all students. I've heard a lot. And also I worry about those with special needs who can't regulate their body temperature. I worry that there's going to be a crisis situation where someone just can't keep cool enough and parent has to go to work, and that could cause a real problem.
Thank you. Yes.
Mm-hmm. In our last referendum, we've talked about this before, Nikki. We did, for a while, have a air conditioning proposal on the table that was taken off before we went to referendum. So it'd be fairly easy, I think, to go back and kind of dust off our previous thinking on air conditioning. Yes. and see what you guys might want to do, if that's the priority for the board.
Mike, can you go back to the planning calendar?
Oh, yes, sure.
So what I'm hearing from the board here is I think that there's a lot more that we'd like to see. And I don't see this public input and reaction is how much comes back to us before we're going, and at what stage is there public input, and at what, because I feel there's more work at the board level, at the work group level, before it goes to public input.
Yeah, I think in very general terms, so what we're trying to get tonight is a good understanding that we're more or less on the same page for some of these moving parts. So we can start planning and getting some professional services in place to flesh out some. The public input piece is going to be informed by that step and then what the board is interested in. So, for example, we know that we have as a priority on the short list here a school in the south section of Alice. Is there land actually available for that? So it's a very technical answer. Looking around, is there something that's a viable site? After that, we bring back our findings to the board to say, this looks like a viable space. May not be one particular place, but it's a viable concept in terms of real estate availability. What do you want to know from the public? So we want to make sure that we're asking the questions that you want answers to. So we feel that we need to have a technical answer about things like availability, and then check in with you on the vibe that you want to get a read on from the community. So there would be a two-step process. We're not going to take tonight's conversation and get focus groups together. We don't know what questions we'd be asking.
Yeah, so I feel the high schools, I think that, I mean, from what, or maybe I didn't hear, is that folks are interested in moving ahead, depending on even what it looks like, but yes, right? Mm-hmm. And even the middle school, I didn't hear anything other than let's look at some other options, but we're not doing there. What I'm hearing on elementary is that even prior to putting in a lot of work about location and whatever, that there's a lot more that the board wants to discuss about that.
Yeah, that's what I heard too, Mary. And
okay.
We haven't obviously planned our calendar yet for next year, but we're going to have to figure out some key junctures, and I think digging into the elementary options more seems
Mhm.
the right next step to me.
Yes.
We can start to engage people around high school, and I think I hear a lot of interest in that too. I'm certainly interested in it.
Yeah.
But the elementary work needs a little more analysis
Mhm.
before we start engaging people. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll offer now, in response to Kate's earlier question, and give you an idea of some of the analysis. So we've been poking around with some scenario building, so we knew that we weren't completely off base with what we were talking about. It is true about 206 students currently living in the Allied area are going to various MMSD schools. We also know that there are many families in neighborhoods right next door to that are open and rolling in. So that's part of that conversation about boundary changes, as well as my earlier comments around various attractants for a school for Allied. Join me in some longer term thinking. So looking at development that can occur over the next 15 or 20 years, we took a look at the development that was possible on the far east side. If you look at moving some of these boundaries around, contingent on the construction of two projects. One is South Alice as a new school, and Sprecher as a new school. Sprecher would open at 282 students and grow to 500. So one of our larger elementaries. If you look at Alice, based on our projections, not a lot of development possible in that area. Looking at about 445 students for the next 20 years. If we did nothing for Kennedy and the development along the interstate and south of that had occurred, when that occurs, they'll grow from 508 to about 702. So
Andrew, I'm
not
sorry
viable.
to interrupt, but I'm the
Please.
timekeeper here, and we do have
Okay.
meetings after this, and
got
I
it.
noticed that we're still, and I think the fact that we said we need to come back and
Let's follow up on
look
this.
at elementary in a much broader way, if we can continue at that
got
point,
it.
I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. TJ?
Can we wrap up
TJ has
with-
been waiting.
Oh,
for-
sure.
Yeah.
Just kind of, I guess I want to reemphasize and reiterate many of the things that both Kate and Mary said about the process and about decision making. Secondly, I want to throw two other things on here. Number one is that when we talk about upgrades and remodels, that we do so in the context of our generalized maintenance needs and our maintenance spending. And also just say thank you for the list of maintenance projects or remodel projects or whatever the hell, I don't know what we call it, but that illustrates the fact that there is this gray area that is between remodel and maintenance. And that we be conscious of that in our Fund 41 and how we've been using that and what's available. The final thing has to do with school capacity, which is that we have these kind of ever-changing school capacities based on current usage. And I think that as we enter this process, or as we continue in this process, that we need to spell out some parameters and say that these are school capacities based on class sizes of this, library space of that, cafeteria space of this, just kind of some of absolutes, and understand that schools deviate from these standards. But it's really hard to, because if they convert a classroom into a sensory room, then the capacity of the school shrinks by 25 students. And the next year when it comes back from being, and the next year the sensory room turns back into a classroom and it goes up by 25 students, and we don't have any constants to look at. And so I really would like to see that, and one that is inclusive of 4K, because the other issue is that 4K moves around based on available space. And just as we talk about what is the capacity of X school, I'd like to have some kind of, based on these standards, not based on current use, this is the capacity of the school. And both are useful. Now, I appreciate what we have now is useful, but I think that the other is also needs to be part of the conversation. And again, especially when we're going before the public asking for 60 or 80 or 90 or $100 million. So those are my two things on this.
So can I wrap up?
Yeah.
Thank you, TJ. I appreciate that, and we agree with what you pointed out. So last piece in this, just kind of a positive, I think, note. I think, just from this conversation, recognize the scope and scale of long-range facility planning. It's a big lift, but here are some things that help to balance that. We have a low level of existing bonded debt, very low, really, relative to the size of the district. And it's because there are stages in this work and cycles, and we're sort of emerging into a reinvestment cycle. We have really strong tax base growth due to real construction, not just inflation of existing properties. It'll be really important in financial planning to try to tie the increase in debt service costs to the increase in real tax base growth to support those costs. If we can get those two to move in tandem, that would be ideal. And lastly, we have this unusual phenomenon, I guess one beyond that, of level enrollment with an increasing tax base. So our new capacity is not directed at building new schools like you might find in a suburban sprawl district. It gives us the opportunity to use the community tax base on existing school reinvestment. It's unusual. Usually tax base means more homes. It's not the same here. Last point, and this is, I think, something really important about Madison. It's one of the things I love about this community. We have these two unusual items. One, we always rank in the top 20% of school districts in the state in terms of tax base per student. We're listed among the wealthy school districts as using that measure, tax base per student. We also have 48% of our students who live in homes whose income qualifies them for free and reduced price lunch. So that is unusual. Most of the districts that have high tax per student, value per student, are, you know, Elmbrook, right? So usually income inequality is very place-based. And if you're in a poor community with low-cost housing, you end up going to poorly funded schools. And here we have this exception where you can be a family of low income, but because you live in Madison, you can go to a great school and a great school facility. And that is like the holy grail if we could get that done. Now, I think that that's possible and lofty, but possible. And that's what we're going to focus on.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, do we turn it over to Matt for the policy discussion?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Why don't you guys stay put for the policy discussion?
Yes, we're just going to rearrange a little bit here and let Matt get a microphone and get the right slide on the screens.
Thanks.
So in describing the policy, I just want to focus on kind of three themes that we certainly tried to incorporate within the policy. One is equity, and that there be equitable considerations at all levels, whether it be attendance area shifting or building buildings. So we incorporated that directly into the policy. Two, and I think this fits well into a lot of what Mike said, is that, and a lot of I think what the board is seeking is that we do need to establish a long-range facility plan. Right now we have a lot of resources, we have a lot of information, but a plan I think is what the board is really seeking. Based upon how I've drafted the policy, that plan would be reviewed every 3 years. At a minimum, right. It is written as at a minimum. And finally, there's a section in here that speaks to factors we would consider when revising attendance areas. Those factors were informed by the 6 considerations, which is a document I believe that was part of the PowerPoint. I think it's on the next slide actually. But those 6 considerations were, they're not policy, but they were adopted by the board back in 2007. And those certainly informed what we have in 2A through E in terms of if and when we would revise any sort of school district boundaries.
Okay. Questions for Matt?
Are you going to walk through the policy, or because most things I have is kind of walking through the policy, and I can do that now if you want.
Yeah, let's just jump into it.
Hit into it. I'm going to go top to bottom. So I've got the policy in front of me. At the top, it says it is the policy. And some of this I did via email with you, and some of this is kind of new from third read. It is the policy of the Board of Education to construct, revise, and maintain school buildings. I think that, as your introduction showed, in the context of this, is that we're also talking about attendance area boundaries. And so perhaps we should insert language about revising, not also revising buildings. Revising a building is kind of a strange. I think that the revise refers to attendance area boundaries as much as to buildings.
Okay.
Second thing is, and this is just something to call out, we quote the actual mission, the current vision statement right now. Someone pointed out to me that if the vision statement changes, then do we have to go back and change the vision statement in here? Do we just want to say the district's vision instead of quoting it? I'll push that aside. I don't really, that's just something I'm mentioning now. My biggest concern here is with actually I'm going to skip down and then come back to my biggest concern because I think that's going to have the most discussion. On subsection 2E, where it says neighborhood composition, we did a little back and forth. I think neighborhood integrity is what we're trying to get at, maybe.
Would neighborhood composition and integrity?
That would be fine. But okay. I think the idea here and the idea from the original 6 guiding ones was that, you know what, you don't split up a neighborhood unless you have to. And I think that we've split up some neighborhoods, and we have some regrets. So I think that neighborhood integrity is what we're trying to get at here.
Okay.
Here's the tough one. Number 1, it says the district will develop a long-range facilities plan, and I think we should. I think what's described here isn't a plan. I think what's described here is planning resources. And I think if we wanted to, spend some time and figure out what a definition of a plan is, but I think that, as this previous discussion showed us, that a plan involves priorities and prioritizing and saying that, you know what, these are the things we want to do in the next 5 years. These are the things we're watching and we're considering for the 5 years after that. These are the guidelines and values we're using to do it. This is the process by which we will make decisions around these. That's a plan. What's listed here is resources for planning.
What do you mean what's listed here, TJ?
Such plans shall be, the plan shall include but not be limited to attendance areas, building assessments, growth projections, instructional design, needs, and processes for community engagement.
That describes the resources.
I mean, I guess the attendance areas are both resources for plan and part of a plan.
Yeah.
But the rest of those things are planning resources as far as I'm
concerned. Should it be,
they
should take in, the plan shall take into account?
Into account? That would be cool. And I guess, I mean, we can either define a plan here or not. Or we can just say that everyone knows what a plan looks like. And I also think that a plan should require board approval. That if we have a plan that sets priorities, that gets vetted and approved by the board.
Yeah.
So that's as I said, that's the toughest thing I got. And it's all I got right now too. So.
Okay, so let's let's see. Why don't we get the other issues on the table and then come back and discuss that? Nikki, do you have anything?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for including number 4. Oftentimes the issue of disability is mentioned but isn't discussed. It's not always in the formal plan, so I do appreciate the inclusion.
Okay.
So I'm the very first bullet in our old policy is kind of the statement, we won't build new buildings unless we are out of capacity, right? And it sets up this tension between neighborhoods and evolving demographics and needs and all of the reasons that we would want to do something even if we have capacity, which is essentially what we're talking about right now, right? And I think the efficient use of our resources is part of our job as a board. So I guess I'm a little uncomfortable completely removing our obligation to our taxpayers to think about efficiency. And we've removed both that first sentence and the first bullet here. I don't know the perfect way to finesse that, and I appreciate that this is not black and white, and nor should it be. But I do think, I mean, we're a $500 million resource for our city, and one of our primary roles is to invest our taxpayer dollars wisely, so.
So would that be included in number 1, Kate, under the plan we'll take into account?
I think you can put it, honestly, I think you can put it wherever you want.
Yeah, but it needs to be in there.
Just, I think that it's part of our, it's part of our job.
And it's part of the resource, anyway, the resource list, yeah.
Okay. So I just want to call out up in kind of the, and I know that sometimes our intro statements don't seem to have as much weight as when we put it into procedure. But we do have a statement in the intro of it's the policy of the board to promote efficient use of existing school buildings. But I think that's a great idea to have that as part of the plan as well.
Yeah, and I think promote feels different to me than invest resources to ensure that we're using our facilities efficiently. So.
Okay.
Which may include doing things like what TJ suggested, not just attention to student space, but how we're using extra space for other reasons like professional development space.
Okay, so then we'll go back to TJ's point with regards to the approval of the plan. The sticking point is approval of the plan by the board. Nikki?
I would agree with TJ's idea. I think the board has to be an integral part, and the board is the one that helps to implement, to make sure that it gets through us. And in order to do that, I think we need to be able to approve it like we do the affirmative action plan, like we do the facilities plan.
It reminds me of the technology plan
Yeah.
a little bit, Nikki. Yeah.
Well, and if we're reminding of the technology plan, actually I see more problems now that she said that, because because that was, I think it's one thing to commit ourselves to, it's not knowing what resources are available. And here, at least the technology plan had some very finite resources that were saying, this is our goal, we want to get this type of technology in all of our schools, this is how we're going to do it over time. With building and facilities, to me, it just seems it's far, far broader than that, or could be far broader than that, and needing to basically, if it gets as specific as the technology plan and what those deliverables are and what we're going to be doing, and always looking that far in advance, I find that, like, I do feel committed to the technology plan. I'd find it very, very hard to commit to special projects, specific projects and commitments every single 3 years, way ahead of it, not knowing what else is in the budget, not knowing what else our tax base looks like, what else will come up. I would find that very difficult if it had the specificity of the technology plan. TJ?
I think you commit to the 3 to 4 year things as the items, and then with specificity, and that informs referenda, and then the 5 to 8 year or 4 to 8 year stuff with less specificity, and the 10 to 20 with generalized areas of consideration and things like that. But I think that I mean, I agree with you that you can't, that, you know, that I don't think we want a plan every 3 years that commits us to building something 15 years from now. I mean, that's not what I envision. But I do think that if we're going to have something we call a long-term facilities plan, it should reflect a commitment to these are our priorities in the short term, and these are our considerations and thinking in the longer term. It should set priorities, and it should force us to make those decisions, or else I can't call it a plan. I mean, we can change it to the district shall develop a long-term facilities process, and that's that, and that's fine. But if we're going to call it a plan, I think it has to set priorities, and I think those priorities have to be approved by the board.
I think my problem is we can agree on priorities. I don't have a problem agreeing on priorities, but it doesn't mean, and to me, that doesn't mean it gets funded. It means it's a priority just like other things are priorities. Whereas I feel the technology plan, that was much more firm of a commitment. And so I think that would, if we're talking about a plan that sets priorities, I have no problem with that. But I do have a problem if we're committing to basically spending.
I mean, we're going to be forced, our hand's going to be forced a little bit. We're looking at land on the far west side right now. We have land on the far east side right now. And those are choices that we could make disaggregated from a future board that would decide or not decide to build on the far west side land. I mean, how long have we had the Sprecher Road land? Right? So, I mean, one way or the other, our hand's gonna be forced. We might as well have a framework that it fits into.
Oh, I'm all for a
So,
plan.
like,
It's just, what does a plan mean? And is the board accepting the plan, or is the board approving it? And if we approve it, what does that commit us to 3 years from now? That regardless of whether we have the resources or not.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think if we're going to establish a long-term plan, that the board should approve it. I mean, I think we should commit ourselves to the long-range, planning and figuring out where our city's going to grow, where we're going to build, set those priorities, as you said, and have it approved by the board. That can always change, right? But I think we should have a vision, and the board should have the ability to approve that. It's going to involve budget, it's going to involve all sorts of things, so we have to be able to be in a position to back it up and approve it. That's my thought.
I totally agree. And I mean, Gloria, you just said we have to have a vision, and to me, that's what this process is about, because it feels like what we're talking about is like location and numbers, and I actually think that what this is about is us figuring out what our vision for the quality, the caliber of our schools and the environment we're offering kids, and that absolutely has to do with where they're located, but I mean, I think your intro, Mike, pointed out we have never had the conversation about what we actually want our buildings to be like. We've dealt with asbestos and lead, and it's good that we did those things, and there's an opportunity for us to have a bigger, grander vision about how our facilities support education, which is different than like, do we need a school on this road or not, right? Because we have 27,000 kids in buildings we own right now that we can and have to talk about that with, so.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is, it's for board approval, and you have the feedback, so.
Thank you. And we're used to funding being a separate issue. This would be a statement of priorities, and the board would agree on those priorities with the understanding that funding is so volatile based on state budget and other factors that it has to be done,
through the annual budget process. Yeah, that's how we've done it. Makes
Just
sense
adding on
too.
the funding that 95% of this will be funded via referenda if funded. I mean, that's the reality. But as Kate pointed out earlier, that building a new school there's an annual operating budget. There are fixed expenses in a new school. It's been estimated about $500,000, just regardless of that when you combine facilities maintenance, administrative, having it's about so that's there every year too. That's an operating budget item.
It's real money. I have one last question, sorry. Should we talk about the alternative school proposal separately, since it wouldn't necessarily have to be tied to a referendum through this?
We're actually on, that was just about the policy. Now we're moving on to the next agenda item. Youth apprenticeship.
Mike, could you do me one quick favor and go back to the timeline side? I just want to, and we can have this discussion later, Mary, and you just tell me if you'd prefer that, but I need to think about if we're going to approve a plan for the next 4 years, presumably, right? that will then flow into a discussion about referendum that would need to be approved, I would think, sometime this year. And so I just want to point that out. I mean, we'll have to land on what month makes the most sense once we have our planning meeting in August, which is coming up shortly, but we'll need to build it into the timeline somehow.
Okay.
So let's be thinking about that.
When you say this year, you mean this school year or
The
this
school
calendar
year.
year? That's I agree.
Oh, yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
School year. I just want to make.
Okay,
sure. I
I
didn't
thought
know
you
what you
meant
meant
calendar.
year.
I know, I was
Sorry,
like,
I think
Mom.
I didn't live in school
Yeah.
years. I only talk in school years. You know that's true. Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. All right. Thanks, guys.
Okay,
Really
thank you.
appreciate it.
Okay. So, Jessica, you're here with the Youth Apprenticeship Partnership Memorandum?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we'll try to keep this brief because we have a long night ahead. So as Mary noted, we're here to discuss the Youth Apprenticeship Program, which is a high-intensity partnership among the Workforce Development Board of South Central Wisconsin, Greater Madison Chamber of Commerce, and ourselves. For this evening, we are basically reviewing documents and having discussion to support seeking a 3-year renewal of our MOA based on review of past performance and our continued efforts to strengthen the experience for our students. So I think the key member at the table here is Jen Wagner, our Director of Pathways and Career and Technical Education. She'll be able to give a brief snapshot of the program itself and then highlight a few of the strengths and opportunities ahead for us. So Jen, take it away.
Welcome, Jen. There you go.
Apparently I need technical assistance.
It just shows that you aren't at this table very often.
Which is fun, but thank you for an opportunity to talk about our youth apprenticeship programming. So before we dive into specifics around youth apprenticeship, just want to make sure that we're aware that youth apprenticeship is actually a piece or a part of a larger experiential learning continuum that was developed as part of work with our partners in the community over the past few years. And so that continuum really delves into awareness, exploration, preparation, and training opportunities, really in that order, that range everywhere from guest speaking to college visits to field trips, job shadowing, internships. And then our youth apprenticeship opportunity for students is really the most intensive and immersive program that requires a commitment to both related coursework at the same time as working toward 450 hours of paid work experience in a related position. This is a state-level program that is overseen by the Department of Workforce Development, and it delivers dollars to assist in the implementation of youth apprenticeship through consortiums. For example, our consortium is the South Central Wisconsin Consortium that's administered by the Workforce Development Board of South Central Wisconsin, thereby one of the partners within the MOA. And then we also work closely with the Greater Madison Chamber of Commerce Foundation in order to deliver not only pieces of the youth apprenticeship program, but the bigger or the larger youth experiential learning continuum. So these opportunities for students range in a multitude of areas, including health science, information technology, transportation, manufacturing, hospitality, finance, STEM, architecture, construction, and others. Really our highlights for youth apprenticeship in the last few years have been our students that are in youth apprenticeship also graduating. So students that are engaged are graduating at a high rate. They're completing high levels of coursework, including coursework on the UW campus, at Madison College on the Edgewood campus, at the same time that they're also taking coursework in our high schools and working toward their 450 hours. Students are also earning the state employability skills certificate, which is an opportunity for them to showcase that they have the foundational soft skills that are aligned to our graduate vision to be prepared for the next steps in their working and their post-secondary opportunities. We have seen the average salary for our youth apprenticeship students increasing So this year, those dollar figures are ranging anywhere from $8 to $15.56 for our students working in youth apprenticeship. So that is a really nice added value to our students as well. Many of our completers at a high percentage rate are being offered positions beyond youth apprenticeship. So they complete their 450 hours and are being offered positions to stay. Nice. We're also developing new business placements for our youth apprenticeship students. And those students that are not receiving current placements are receiving a high level of touch points through our pre-apprenticeship programs. That includes interview fairs, tours, job fairs, resume development, and the like. The kind of culminating event for many of our students this past year was our first recognition banquet for our youth apprenticeship students and many of our other experiential learning continuum opportunities, and all of our youth apprenticeship students came and actually shared their stories with our audience. It was a phenomenal evening, and hope to see many of you there next year. Areas of growth are really to continue to recruit with our high school staff, including our career and technical education staff, our counselors, particularly those students in areas that are traditionally underrepresented. Front-loading employability skill opportunities through our graduate vision and through the work that we're doing with the City of Madison through the Youth Employment Network as a preparatory step toward youth apprenticeship. And just working more closely with students and families to make the real magic happen for youth apprenticeship, because it is a little bit of a magic show to ensure that students have an opportunity that's in their location at the right time that matches what their schedule can actually accommodate, and to make sure that we have a high quality mentor in that particular business as well. So we continue to work on that.
Great, thank you. Questions? Tisha.
Three quick things, and I think they're mostly quick. Actually, I think the third one's not quick. First one is that one of the I was complaining earlier tonight about going to too many TIF meetings in Fitchburg. One of the advantages of that is to learn that Verona School's youth apprenticeship program, Promega, is working with them on that, and we are signing off on big Promega TIFs almost every week these days. And so I just want to give that tip. I meant to do something via email and I forgot, but this just reminded me. So and I know that that the kind of biotech opportunities are difficult to find. So Promega is doing YA stuff with Verona Schools. So we should be too. And because Promega is located within our boundaries. Number two is that I will, when we come back with the Greater Madison Chamber of Commerce contract, I think we'll discuss that, and I'm going to set that aside for now. The third is, and the last thing is, that it looks on the metrics that we are realistically, and for a variety of reasons, reducing our performance metrics to be about 35 students. And I guess my question related to that is, are there other performance metrics that we could include that would capture students who are exposed or participating in some way without being fully registered YA students? And if we can do that, I mean, I think that to have this all around 35 students, you know, student breaks his leg and suddenly we've lost, you know, 5% or whatever thing, right? And so if we can have something that looks at students who have not the full involvement, when it comes back to us, that would be appreciated. Just kind of to get a fuller picture of it and to have something else to monitor, because when we're down to 35 students for monitoring, it gets a little weird. So that's my three things.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback. I think we can certainly look at that. I think we started to integrate a little bit more reporting out on the pre-apprenticeship experiences and understanding that's a key foundational piece in the ultimate work of YA. We can certainly look at that and bring back.
Jen, can you just, how many students are involved in pre-apprenticeship experiences? Do you have any idea off the top of your head?
So both our apprenticeship and our pre-apprenticeship students range on an average year between 150 to 175 students in pre-apprenticeship.
Okay. Yeah, that would be great to incorporate in some way. It's a great suggestion.
Could you comment on the low percentage, the 3% of African American students in the actual apprenticeship?
So our numbers prior to 17-18 in this particular area were better because of our partnership with Operation Fresh Start.
Yeah.
Operation Fresh Start continues to serve our students in the same capacity that they always have.
Yeah.
However, instead of being a youth apprenticeship site and opportunity for students, they are now considered a pre-apprenticeship readiness program through the Department of Workforce Development. So that has decreased those particular numbers. However, it hasn't necessarily decreased the percentage of our students in pre-apprenticeship opportunities. So we are continuing to, again, make that magic happen for a number of our students. And so we'll continue to work on that over the course of time.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and it is great to see that the pre-apprenticeship percentages are pretty much in line with the demographics. Certainly quite a bit lower on Hispanic students, and overall, it's interesting that it's so low on low-income students. So you only have 21% of pre-apprenticeship students be low-income students, but even the youth apprenticeship demographics. Yeah, even with the change in Operation Fresh Start, I don't think that's a good enough reason to have only 3% African. I mean, that's out of 30, that's one student.
Yeah, I agree.
And Hispanic, that's two students out of 35. I would,
yeah.
That to me isn't acceptable.
I have one
Nikki?
question regarding that.
Mm-hmm.
Do they provide transportation costs? Does the Youth Apprentice Program provide transportation costs to and from the site? And is that possibly a reason of low income if they could not get there?
That's a good question. What do you guys think?
So if you take a look at our end of year report, you'll notice a section called challenges and then another section called continuous improvement. So Nikki, to answer your question specifically, we do not provide transportation for students. However, we do try to work with students around a location where they can have access to employment on bus lines, on what will work for them. But again, that's part of those challenges and finding that magic for each individual student. Part of the magic is also timing with regards to if a student's opportunity comes up mid-first quarter, that's almost an impossibility for them to change their entire schedule to potentially take advantage of an opportunity, and the opportunity may not be there then by the time they're able to take advantage of the opportunity. So, we are working to ensure that as much as possible, we're setting students up for success over the summer months. And doing that business development earlier in the year. So that is part of our continuous improvement spaces, as well as to continue to increase those opportunities, particularly at a time frame where students can take advantage of those opportunities to the best of their ability.
Mm-hmm. Do you tie in at all to other internship programs? So I'm thinking about the Boys and Girls Club has a fairly large summer internship program, and I'm just wondering if students there, with those relationships with employers anyway, can move into this, obviously because there's more funding involved, and they already have connections with employers as well.
So those are part of our continuous improvement as well, partially because there is a wide plethora of opportunities in the Youth Employment Network, but we're not necessarily, as a district, tied to many of those particular opportunities. So as we've become closer, particularly to, for example, the Youth Employment Network, we have representation now on the Youth Employment Network and are able to work with folks in each of those individual organizations to help to bring their work closer to the district and our work closer to them. I think you'll see that we're going to be able to leverage those opportunities more over time. So yes.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions? James?
Yeah, just some clarification. But just to piggyback on Mary's point, but then when you look at the panel reviewed information, it talks about higher rate of participation. So can you help me understand how we can have the low rate of participation for kids of color, then end up with a very high rate of participation in the Youth Apprenticeship Program?
Okay. So the panel review is from 2014 to 2017, which is when Operation Fresh Start was actually part of our youth apprenticeship numbers. So the students that qualified for youth apprenticeship during those particular years were part of those particular numbers. Mid-2017 is actually when OFS stepped out of youth apprenticeship, so that's why our 2017-18 numbers have decreased.
Okay, so this is going to be on this month's board agenda then for
yes,
approval.
That's accurate. So based on the discussion this evening, we'll make adjustments and we'll bring forward the final documents for the regular meeting vote.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thanks, Jessica.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, so that is our last agenda item. I will move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. And now we can start our next meeting.
Won't be long.
Can we have 2
Okay.
minutes?
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the failure to provide transportation is the issue. Watching some of the pictures.
And then she had like, she has like
I hear you.
Kids who are graduating from high school. She's
It makes it very difficult.
in elementary school.
Okay, I'm going to call to order the special Board of Education meeting and open session workshop.
Yeah, I mean, there's no
followed
way
by
you can make the
closed
statement.
session. So our
Overrepresentation.
first order of business is proposed modifications to the core values statements.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Andrew and I are here together tonight. I'm going to take the lead on core values. He's going to help out with when we get to the metric, the safety metric. So on core values, I want to thank the board for getting us your feedback on the framework as a whole. Really appreciate that. We have incorporated all of your suggestions at this point, every last one. Yeah, the board meeting, TJ. That's not quite true.
It's
I
just
did
because
get
went
it
first, too, so I like.
Everyone just says I agree.
Yeah.
No, that's not
Without-
what happened.
Yeah.
So I wanted to let you know that I made those changes, and there were some suggestions to the core value statements themselves, which were approved by the board back in February. So in order to change them would require approval, which is why we're here tonight. I took some advantage of this opportunity to fix two things that were driving me crazy. So I'm just going to point those out to you. And under belonging, I changed status to statuses. Several people have been pointing this out to me. And as a former English teacher, I actually looked this up. You could go both ways, but it's more, it's better to add the ES, so I did that. And I added equity back into racial equity and social justice. There was a time when we shortened it together to racial and social justice, just to make it more concise. But the fact that the word equity was not present in the core values, I got some regular feedback on that, so I'm going to put that out there as a possible change. The others were all suggested by TJ. With the exception of maybe under focus, I tried to change something to address an issue that TJ had raised. And I don't know if I got it quite right, TJ. You had wondered what we meant by paying close attention to.
It reads better. It
reads better. I think it does too. So I appreciated the suggestion. But I'll let TJ go ahead and explain why you suggested.
I think this should be pretty quick.
Yeah.
Most of you know that I wasn't comfortable with removing the metric around well-rounded participation. And last week, I started getting messages from friends from arts in the arts community going, "What do you mean there's no arts in the framework?"
Yeah.
And it brought it back, and I went back and reread the framework and said, okay, we're not going to add a new metric, we're not going to add that back, but is there a place where we can include language that that reiterates our commitment to the arts? The excellence seemed like a great place to do it. Standing alone, it would have looked really funny. So put it in experiences in academics, the arts, and social emotional development, which are I think 3 areas where we all agree that we're seeking excellence. So,
Yeah.
That's the easy one. They're all pretty easy. I also think that when we start talking about accountability, just as you know, there are things that. How we use accountability, I think we have to be very careful. It's something that bothers me, and when I saw that we would be accountable to ourselves, that didn't sit well. I think that we are ultimately accountable to our community. I appreciate the way it was rephrased by the superintendent, and I think we're good with that.
I think your other change, TJ, was moving excellence to the top of the list.
When did that change? I don't know when that
belonging
got
has
moved.
always been first. I don't know when it got moved.
I have a document somewhere where excellence is before belonging because.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Started at the top.
I think the strategic framework draft that was provided to the retreat.
You know,
okay, you guys. You know what? Let's just.
I do remember a conversation about wanting belonging first, but I think it makes sense to me. Yeah.
Where's the accountability piece you're just talking about?
It is
under focus.
Focus.
So instead of we hold ourselves, it's we will be accountable to the community.
Yeah, like that much better.
Okay, well, TJ, thank you. And so,
James makes me happy. I'm like, can you never move me away from sitting next to him, Mary?
yeah, okay. Okay, well, I'm going to move that the Board of Education adopt the modifications to the core values statement for the next strategic framework as set forth in the materials provided for the July 16, 2018 special meeting.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? James? No? Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. That passes 6-0.
All right, so let's move to the safety metric. As a reminder, the board voted on the goals and metrics also back in February, and there was an amendment to add a placeholder on safety at that time. And so we're here to resolve the placeholder issue and actually have a metric that we can build into the framework before the end of the month. The research team did a little work on this and has a proposal on the table. We did get a suggestion that we consider expanding this beyond just the percent of positive students responding to the annual climate survey question about safety to include parents and staff. And Andrew will talk a little bit about our thoughts on that, but we leave it up to you guys to make a decision, obviously.
Yeah, thanks for the chance to tie off a loose end. So we'll take a look at a very brief recommendation, then open up for discussion. So there is a climate survey question for our students: is I feel safe at school, safe at my school in particular. So the short list got even shorter when we looked at the strength of what this measure does for us. So it's a direct relationship to what we're trying to improve upon and what we're trying to learn more about. I'll come back to that, a couple of more points, but it's also a direct statement about students' experience and puts their voice directly into the framework itself. And it comes with a pre-existing baseline. We've got 4 years of baseline around that question already, so it's not like we're building something brand new. On the question about it being a direct relationship and something we're trying to learn more about, first I want to talk about this as an area of focus and of importance. So if you look at, one way to look at this is the number of schools that have 90% positive responses to a question. So among staff, we have about half of our schools where staff say that they believe the school is safe. So at 90%, better than half of our schools.
90% or higher.
90% or higher, thank you. Yeah. Families, about 14 of the schools over 90%. So again, it's a high bar. Still have about half of our, approaching half of our schools are, according to families, safe places. However, if you look at the students, we don't have any student positive responses amounting to 90% or higher in any of our school locations. So it represents some work that has to be done. So it maxes out at 87%, and there are only 4 that are over 80. So it represents, by comparison to staff and families, an area of improvement for us, an area of growth. So that's one reason to look at it for focus. Also, it's really within our locus of control. So there's a thought, too, that if conditions improve for students, then that would inform families' perceptions, at least to a degree. And staff may have considerations or concerns that go beyond what we can address within the school facility or within the school culture. So that's the quick breeze through how we got to the short list. I just wanted to expand on the first bullet, and we can just take it from there, I suppose.
Yeah, and while our recommendation is to focus on the student group for the reasons that Andrew described, we want you to know that we're fine with doing staff, students, and parents, and we just leave it up to you.
Nikki.
I just want to also state thank you. One, I like the metric. 2, I think we should include that the student voice is probably the most important. They're the ones who are going and spending every day here. I think that needs to be heard loud and clear. But also thank you for not including the suspensions and expulsions, because it's, otherwise what it would do is you could figure it out. And to me, when you say behavior, you are implying that there's some control. And a lot of times there is, but on certain individuals with disability, there isn't. It's not something they can control. And I don't want that to be seen as linking punishment with behavior that cannot be controlled.
Teacher.
I really think we should include the staff. I think the parents' perception is kind of optional as far as I'm concerned, but I think the staff perception is very important. I think it's important for us to monitor that, but also to communicate that that's an area of concern. And I think that when we talk about half the schools this and half the schools that there's a great disparity between the surveyed staff safety perceptions at the middle and high school level. So though we have about half our students at middle and high school, where the numbers are very low in the 60s and 70s, half our schools are, more than half our schools are elementary schools. So that doesn't really work. I really, you know, when we talk about, I mean, elsewhere we have things related to teacher retention and that, and we have themes around our climates and staff morale and things. I think safety is very basic. I kind of looked at the trends and looked at things with a few of the ones. I think that the basic safety question is fine for staff. One of the things that I found very interesting was some differences around my belongings are safe at school.
Oh, yeah.
Where the ratings were lower than my person is safe. But I don't think we want to go there. But I think that it's just that it's something that staff safety. It's important.
What portion of our staff take the survey?
Very high percentage of the
80s.
staff. Yeah. Very high, and it's gone up over the years.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very engaged.
I think there's good arguments. I appreciate Andrew the data on the students and parents and staff. I like the idea of keeping it clean, keeping the focus on the students, but I think TJ brings up a really good point about even though we have 14 schools where it's above 90%, great, but let's get everyone at 90% for our staff as well, and I'm sure you'll see improvements in the students that they're somewhat tied together. So I would be in favor of, I don't think it clutters it a whole lot or takes the emphasis off, and I think it's important.
Can I make the suggestion, if you guys choose to not just focus on the students, I think it feels strange to me not to include parents too. Like, I just think that you should need to do all three groups. That's my personal opinion.
The parents. Oh.
I'm afraid then that we are really saying that that it is distracting then, to me. I think when it's already really high, I don't think it's something that we need to focus.
I thought it was the staff that was the highest.
Staff is the highest.
Yeah,
so
that's
half of our schools are greater than 90,
for
and
staff.
14 of the schools among families are 90 or better.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood that.
Mary?
Yeah.
I mean, I just think that, I think in keeping this for parents and staff and students as well is important. I think just to remain the consistency. I mean, as we change and safety and security, I mean, it changes, right? I mean, dramatically. So, I mean, I think that just to continue that so that we can keep track of what's working, what's not, as we are implementing our security measures in our schools. I think it's important. I would want to know if, you know, our teachers, I mean, our parents or our teachers change in perception based on what's happening nationally or locally, right? I would like to keep that in for all three of them.
I'm okay with that.
TJ, you're looking at me all crazy.
Yeah, teacher.
you know, one of the things that the one reason I said that I thought parents were optional is because of the low and uneven response rates we get from families, or the relatively low, but the one thing that I think that listening to Gloria that kind of makes me think that maybe it's worth doing is because the parent-family one measures something different, which is it measures in some sense our communication in ways that you know, one is the experiences of people who are in the building every day. The other is what is being communicated. And I think that that's something that we're also concerned with, how we're communicating about safety and behavior and things like that. So I think so like I said, it's optional, but I certainly wouldn't oppose it, and maybe kind of rethink things a little bit.
Yeah, I'm for keeping parents in. I think the more data we have, the better.
Okay, so then, let's see, we're going to have to modify this. Should be.
Staff and parent responses.
And the parent question is slightly different.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
I just had the survey open, but do I still have it open? No.
Let's make sure we know if the question makes sense before making this decision.
Parent question.
Right, so is the...
Is a safe place for my child?
Okay.
Is the question.
That's a very different question.
It's what we got. Is that Andrew?
Yeah, no, well, that's an important one. It's definitely a distinction. Okay, so I think I can handle this.
And the staff question just is, I feel safe at my school.
I'm looking.
Yeah, let's just make sure we know that.
Okay, the way I feel
Andrew's just gonna triple check.
that the staff.
Yeah, I feel safe at my school/building, so it applies also to central office and Flom Doyle Building. Quite.
So which one is it?
So safety is among staff is I feel safe at my school/building.
Because it's not just teachers and school-based staff that take the survey.
Okay. So I'm going to move that the Board of Education adopt the following safety metrics as part of the goals and metrics for the next strategic framework as set forth in the materials prepared. No. The next strategic framework. These safety metrics will replace the placeholder that was approved at the February 26, 2018 regular board meeting. For students, the percent of positive student responses to the annual climate survey question, I feel safe at my school. For staff, the percent of positive staff responses to the annual climate survey, I feel safe at my school/building. For parents, percent of positive parent responses to the annual climate survey question, the school is a safe place for my child.
Mary, before you guys vote, if I can interject, it's occurring to me that in the other power questions that are in the framework, you haven't actually voted on what the power questions themselves will be, right? It's just a power question. So I don't think that matters too much, but as long as you understand that in the framework itself, we might not name all three questions, but say the annual climate survey question on safety or something like that. I don't know if you have to get that specific in this vote, but it is.
Right, it's not detailed in that.
Yeah, that's right.
I'd look to TJ to have an opinion on.
No, I was just,
yeah.
No, fine.
If you're okay.
The clock is ticking here.
Yeah, I'm fine with this.
As long as.
Yeah, but as long as you all understand that we haven't
Yep.
actually
We
chosen those
understand.
power questions. Okay, cool.
And can you just read the parent, or, yeah, the parent one again?
The parent one is the school is a safe place for my child.
Should we, just to keep it consistent, I feel?
No, this
Or
is
is it-
actually how it's worded in the
existing?
survey.
Oh,
That's why I
that's
read it
already in
as
there,
it
okay.
is, yeah. We're taking the exact wording from the surveys.
We'll change it twice if we have to, that's right.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
That passes 5-1.
I think the teachers should be separate. I mean, the parents not included. is what I meant.
Okay.
That's just
Okay.
me.
So, next I move that the Board of Education go into closed session for the purpose of discussing the evaluation of the superintendent pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute 19.85 sub 1 sub C.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll go into closed session then.